As you'd expect from a multimedia juggernaut like Pokémon, there have been countless spin-offs over the last 25 years, and that doesn't seem to be slowing down anytime soon. At this point, I've looked at most of the mainline entries in the series, so why not cover all my bases and talk about the spin-offs too? Most of these will be brief looks at the games in question, partially because there's a lot to cover and partially because there's not a lot to say about some of these entries. I'll be covering several sub-series and groups, and there's a few games I won't be covering at all. I won't be covering the Japan-exclusive arcade titles like Batrio or Trade-Out because I have no way to access these games, Pokémon Typing Adventure or Pokémon Dream Radar because I can't properly get footage of these games, and I won't be covering Pokémon Puzzle League, Puzzle Challenge, Art Academy, or Picross because they're different franchises with a Pokémon skin. To get started, I'll talk about the games I have less to say about than the rest. I can give you a group review of all the mobile games right now, and it's not a take that will make me many friends. All of Pokémon's mobile output is bad. They're all either too shallow, too grind-intensive, or at worst, both. I can at least recognize the merits of Go getting people to go outside and Smile teaching very young children to practice good dental hygiene, but the monetization in almost all of them is ridiculously greedy. Masters is the best of the bunch, but it also suffers from the problem of being too simple during the main story and requiring buying into yet another predatory gacha system to have a fighting chance at any content that's actually interesting. At least Masters' focus on trainers is a unique hook, especially in a series with countless interesting human designs that are rarely given screen time. I'm also at a loss as to what to say about Pokémon Troze and its sequel, Battle Troze. As the predecessors to Pokémon Shuffle and Pokémon Cafe Mix, these are puzzle games, and I've never been very big on puzzle games. Still, Troze at least has a unique style of gameplay I haven't seen anywhere else. It's a match 4 puzzle game where you slide the rows and columns instead of directly sliding the Pokémon themselves to create matches. It's enjoyable enough, and fresh compared to the traditional Match 3 format basically any Dime a Dozen Bejeweled clone uses. As a result, it's more painful to see Battle Troze become another generic Match 3 game with a Pokémon skin slapped on it, and having this become the base for the new puzzle games we have today instead of the unique style of the original. Moving on to another genre I don't have much experience with, Pokken Tournament is an incredibly unique experience I never thought we would see. A fighting game made in collaboration with Bandai Namco of Tekken fame, it's a very accessible fighting game that's a great time casually or competitively, with a fervent fanbase that goes to great lengths to support it. No two characters on the roster play alike, and there's something for everyone in this cast. It's especially cool that Pokémon you wouldn't normally consider fit for a fighting game, like Suicune, Chandelure, or Braixen, get a chance to challenge that preconception and look great doing it. As wild as it sounds, the realistic visual style works incredibly well here, and fights moving from 2D to 3D gameplay at the drop of a hat, along with the sound design and visual effects that pack a punch, make it exciting to watch and to play. The single player mode doesn't have a lot to offer, but it's a worthy fighting game at its core. From a technical fighting game to a series that's anything but technical, we have the Poképark Wii games. These two are designed with a very young audience in mind, we're talking the 4 to 8 crowd, and have very little to offer anyone older than the target demographic. The moment-to-moment gameplay is incredibly shallow. As Pikachu, you'll be running around various places, befriending different Pokémon by either chasing or battling them. Chasing Pokémon is as simple as it sounds, and these tend to finish within seconds. There's a bit more depth to battling since you have 3 attacks at your disposal, but every Pokémon you face will have one predictable attack. The rest of the game consists of various minigames which range from serviceable to terrible, with forced motion controls in every one and many minigames reskinned throughout the game. Combine this with a bad control scheme using the Wii Remote on its side to control a 3D game, and a simplistic narrative with simplistic dialogue, and you've got a game that will fail to impress most people past the age of 10. The sequel is a bit better since there's multiple Pokémon to choose from with different moves, but it's still just about as shallow as the first. If you've got a young Pokémon fan at home, these might be worth giving a try, but anyone else should steer clear. Going back a bit, there were actually 2 games released for the Game Boy Color that were video game adaptations of the trading card game. The trading card game was something I only dabbled in once or twice as a kid, so getting to play this was an interesting experience. It's a very faithful adaptation of the original TCG rule set, and it even plays similarly to the main series, having 8 elementally themed challenges followed by an Elite Four. It's shorter than a main series game simply because it's based on the trading card game, where victory is occasionally up to chance and you start off with a decent deck to begin with. The only downside to playing the game today is that, being based on the original rules, it's a far cry from what the game has become these days. Still, if you have any interest in the trading card game, you'll probably get something out of this and its Japan-only sequel. Remember Detective Pikachu? It was actually a game before it became a movie, believe it or not. And considering the game released at the tail end of the 3DS's lifespan, I wouldn't be shocked if some of you weren't aware of it at all. It's another game that's aimed young, and that's a trend we'll be seeing a lot. Whether or not you'll get something out of this depends on how much you enjoy point-and-click adventure games and how much you like Pokemon. If you're a die-hard fan of either, you might get something out of it. Like the movie, you play as Tim Goodman, befriend a talking Pikachu, and team up to solve cases to find out what happened to your father. Despite sharing the same premise, in execution the game is quite different and has a softer tone more akin to what you'd see in the mainline games. Hardcore Pokemon fans, ironically, may stumble a lot more than someone less familiar with the series. Knowing the lore behind various Pokemon species will instantly clue in a seasoned player about certain things. For instance, what a Murkrow feather looks like or how Burmese cloak works, but the game won't let you move on until you interact with just about everything in a given area, even if you've already pieced together what happened yourself. Still, as a beginner's adventure game, it's a solid experience. Supposedly there's a sequel in the works, but we haven't heard about it in quite some time. Watch this statement age like milk within a month or two. The 3DS may have given us relatively little new Pokemon side content, but the DS hardly lacked for side games. One notable series we may never see a new entry from again is the Pokemon Ranger series due to its unique premise. In each game, you take on the role of a Pokemon Ranger, essentially a park ranger who uses a capture styler to temporarily ally with Pokemon to solve problems. Basic gameplay is simple. Draw circles around Pokemon on the touchscreen to capture them while avoiding touching the Pokemon or having attacks hit your line. It's surprisingly enjoyable for what it is. The second and third games are much easier, allowing for mistakes to be made without having to start a capture over from scratch and allow you to actually use captured Pokemon to assist you in battle. While not must-play games, and certainly games that get repetitive quickly, if the premise sounds interesting, I'd recommend giving these a try. Another DS title that went under the radar, Pokemon Conquest, was a late DS title that's a surprising crossover between Pokemon and the Japanese strategy RPG franchise Nobunaga's Ambition. If you're unfamiliar with Nobunaga's Ambition, don't worry. This is essentially an SRPG take on Pokemon with feudal Japan as the backdrop. Your units are all Pokemon, and you take turns against enemy Pokemon on a variety of maps. Each Pokemon has one move and one ability, with some carrying inherent properties based on type. Flying Pokemon can go over certain obstacles, and fire Pokemon can stand on lava, for instance. It has a substantial post-game to dig into as well. As strategy RPGs go, it's a light, newcomer-friendly game that has enough of the depth fans come to expect from a mainline title to make it enjoyable for strategy RPG fans in general. Moving on to another series that got its start on the DS, we have the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon series. A crossover between Pokemon and Mystery Dungeon, as the name implies, the basic idea of every entry is that you've become a Pokemon, usually with no memory beyond your name and the fact that you were once human and have to adapt to this new world while seeking answers for why this happened. It's remarkable that with this premise at the front of every entry, they've somehow managed to keep the overall narratives fresh time and again. And the narrative and characters are big draws for fans of the series. Like the main series, the gameplay is incredibly similar from entry to entry, combining main series Pokemon mechanics like moves with limited uses and recruiting new Pokemon to your team with a randomized dungeon setting. Familiarity with the main series can help a lot, especially when it comes to type matchups, but like any Pokemon game, they're easy to get a grip on regardless of skill level. Your enjoyment of these will ultimately depend on how much you enjoy randomly generated dungeon crawling. These games all start out simple with few dungeon elements, but gradually start to introduce things like traps and monster houses to wear you down. While penalties for failing are lighter than other roguelikes, permadeath isn't a thing for one, they can still be rather steep, and I can totally understand if someone didn't like how the random nature of these dungeons will occasionally kill even the most seasoned players. While some entries are clearly better or worse than others, you could start with any of them to get a feel for how they play. If you enjoy what you played, give Explorers of Sky, Super Mystery Dungeon, and Rescue Team a try. If you get into these games, you'll have a load of content to go through. Back to the original Game Boy for Pokemon Pinball, and the Game Boy Advance for its sequel, Pokemon Pinball Ruby and Sapphire. These are pinball games first and foremost, but they incorporate Pokemon quite well. Your main goal is to catch and train Pokemon by playing pinball. Each game has 2 unique boards, and there's a lot of replay value to be found by learning the boards to collect unique Pokemon found in each one. It's a very beginner-friendly pinball game, with more forgiving physics and mechanics such as the lengthy ball saver and generally high point totals that reach into the millions within minutes that make the game feel more rewarding on a surface level. The original is a bit antiquated these days, but RS holds up surprisingly well, sporting better physics and a board that better takes advantage of the digital pinball medium. Yet another game that strikes the perfect balance between being beginner-friendly with enough to satisfy older players. Any fan of pinball or Pokemon should give one of these games a shot. Speaking of shots, Pokemon Snap is another example of a unique idea birthed at the beginning of the franchise's rise to fame. It's an on-rails shooter where you take pictures of Pokemon. A fantastic concept on idea alone, one that could really sell the world of Pokemon as a living, breathing ecosystem. The ultimate goal is to catalog every species of Pokemon living on Pokemon Island, as well as to capture Mew on film. It's a score-focused game, with each run of a course ending with the player selecting their best photo of each species to be graded by Professor Oak. As you take more pictures and rack up higher scores, you get more tools to interact with the Pokemon and potentially get higher scores. Lure Pikachu over to a surfboard, flush a Scyther out of the grass, get Snorlax to wake up and dance. There's a lot of replay value to these courses, especially if you're looking to get the highest score possible for each Pokemon. It's not perfect. The game is incredibly short, clocking in at only an hour or 2 if you know what you're doing. Some Pokemon locations are a bit esoteric, and scoring can be finicky at times, with Oak rejecting photos you swear were focused properly because the game decided the wrong Pokemon was the subject. Snap had a small but passionate fanbase that clamored for the game's return for years, and this year we finally got just that with the horribly named new Pokemon Snap. It's bigger and better in just about every way. There's over triple the amount of Pokemon compared to the original, there's more courses to travel through, more ways to interact with Pokemon and change the environments you're in. The scoring system has been revamped as well, with different classes of rarity for different poses. It's great to be able to keep fantastic shots of basic actions as well as unique behaviors and provides replay value. It's also much more lenient than the original with no disqualifying penalties. A system that works well for a game about a very subjective medium like photography. The other Pokemon bonus also counts for any Pokemon visible in the shot, not just ones of the same species, which fits well with the framing of the game as an ecological report. It's one of the best glimpses we've been given into the Pokemon world. Nothing graphic is shown, obviously, but interactions between Pokemon, be they predator and prey, ones with a symbiotic relationship, or even just as companions, are all very natural and nothing comes off as forced. The game also takes advantage of online features for photo sharing as well as score attack competition. And to push you towards getting shots of unique behaviors, there's also a request system. New Pokemon Snap is incredibly close to being a perfect sequel, taking everything good about the original game, adding more to it, and modernizing it for a new audience. My only real complaints are that the game starts off slow, your ways of interacting with Pokemon can feel a bit shallow at times, and the game only accepting one photo per run can make getting every behavior for a Pokemon feel like padding. Still, it's a much longer game than the original with a ton of content to explore long after the story runs its course. Photography games won't be for everyone, but New Pokemon Snap is one of the best games the Pokemon series has to offer. From photography to a virtual pet simulator, it's time for another weird entry, Hey You Pikachu. A late N64 game, and certainly the most gimmicky entry, this one sees you befriending a wild Pikachu and interacting with it via voice commands. As far as I can tell, this was the first game to utilize voice recognition tech as a major gameplay mechanic, and for a first attempt it's quite commendable. As impressive as the technology was for the time, however, the game is noticeably shallow, with a very small range of activities to play and more control given to the player as the game goes on. While a younger player likely wouldn't notice due to the novelty of being able to talk to Pikachu, anyone older and especially anyone used to a modern game will be frustrated by things like basic camera control and the ability to interact with your environment being locked away until you progress into the game. Pikachu is more responsive than many give him credit for, but in order for your commands to be correctly processed, you really have to enunciate. Pikachu knows a lot of simple words and phrases, but bafflingly, the word yes isn't programmed into the game's vocabulary. That's right, one of the most basic English responses simply isn't in the game at all. That's not even mentioning the times when Pikachu will simply ignore you and do whatever he wants to instead. The imprecise controls and lack of player control for the early game can make this game frustrating to play at times. It's a very difficult game to recommend, especially since the game historically doesn't emulate well, meaning you'll have to shell out for an N64, a copy of the game, and the VMU required to play. Not very cheap these days, and it won't be getting any cheaper. If the concept still sounds interesting to you, I'd recommend giving it a try for the novelty of being able to talk to Pikachu, but most people would be better off skipping this one.
We're not friends anymore.
Speaking of better off skipping, Umbrella came back a few years later to deliver us Pokemon Channel. The spiritual successor to Hey You Pikachu, this one trades voice control for basically no control. The premise is that you're testing an experimental TV network for Pokemon, and Pikachu is there. That's really about it. It's somehow an even more shallow experience because of the lack of agency you have in the world. You can go places and talk to Pokemon, and you can watch incredibly basic TV programs, and that's about it. If 9-year-old me, who was totally obsessed with anything Pokemon related, thought this game had little to offer, you know you've got a very undercooked game on your hands. The only positives are the exclusive anime short, an emulator for the incredibly obscure Pokemon Mini, and if you're lucky enough to live in Europe or Australia, you can get Jirachi for finishing the game. These days, the internet can provide better ways to experience any of these elements. This one is only for the morbidly curious. Umbrella wasn't done there, though, as a year later they gave us Pokemon Dash as a near-launch title for the DS. It's truly incredible that Umbrella one-upped itself when it came to creating a bad game, because Dash is honestly one of the worst games I've ever played. It's a racing game controlled by swiping across the touchscreen to move Pikachu. And swiping, and swiping, and swiping. It's repetitive strain injury the game. It takes the cake for worst Pokemon game by a country mile simply because it causes physical pain to play it. Even if it did control normally, it's not even a particularly competent racing game. You aren't given a proper map, only a radar and a compass pointed towards the next checkpoint. Visibility is absolutely dreadful, and the main path is rarely ever clear. How long will I be running on this terrain that slows me down? I'll never know, I don't have an actual map to check. The lone unique mechanic of the game has you ride in a balloon to see an overhead view of the course, but this doesn't add much to the game despite the risk-reward factor to the speed at which you pop your balloons. And you lose the compass that guides you while you're in the air. Worst of all, absolutely nothing about this game needed to be a Pokemon game. Unlike every other spin-off I've talked about, you could replace the characters with blobs and lose nothing. An absolutely dreadful experience. Your wrists will thank you for not playing this. On to Umbrella's final outing, and thankfully they were able to make a series that works in Pokemon Rumble. It's essentially Pokemon as a heavily simplified action RPG. You move through simple arenas, fighting Pokemon as you go with simple 1 or 2 button combat. It takes on elements from the main series such as type advantages, but this sub-series is really a button masher at heart. Collect Pokemon as you go through the stages, select the strongest one, and pummel the boss with everything you've got, rinse and repeat. They're not bad, especially compared to all of Umbrella's other games, but they're too simplistic for older players to find much to enjoy after a few minutes of gameplay. Still, most of these games are multiplayer, so you could have a good time playing through one of these games with a younger family member. Finally, we have the Stadium series. Pokemon Stadium's hook was the ability to see your Pokemon battle in 3D, and going from the original Game Boy to true 3D was a spectacle at the time it was released. With the main series transitioning to 3D, that draw has long since worn off, so is there anything else to Pokemon Stadium nowadays? The answer is yes, but only for dedicated players. The animations and models used aren't technically impressive compared to what we have today, but animations especially are dripping with personality. The announcer is famously hammy and an absolute delight to listen to. Even after having sunk countless hours into the game, I still smile at how he delivers some of these lines.
Right, that's sir!
The ability to play through the Gen 1 games on the big screen with features like Speed Up enabled was a godsend, especially at the time. The Stadium series introduced many conventions we're still using today in competitive Pokemon circles. Every fight is a bring 6, choose 3 single battle affair with team preview at the start, and common competitive clauses like Sleep Clause first appeared here. Stadium also fixes some of the battle system jank from the Gen 1 games. Focus Energy works properly, the 1 in 256 glitch is fixed, and Hyper Beam always needs to recharge, but most of the underlying issues with the battle system remain. This is best demonstrated by the average team composition looking just about the same in every endgame team across the board. They knew how dominant the Psychic type was, and the worst Gen 1 had to offer like Paralysis Wrap is here in full force. There's some interesting modes and rule sets, but it's nothing like future games have to offer. Gym Leader Castle is a great concept. Fight through tougher versions of the Gen 1 game's gyms and Elite Four. The Poke and Prime Cups are no-frills Pokemon battles, but the Pika Cup restricts you to Pokemon around level 20, and the Petite Cup restricts you to first stage Pokemon only with a level restriction around the 30s. Given what the player has to work with, these are decent challenges, but not particularly exciting compared to what future Pokemon games would introduce. The game as a whole is incredibly slow-paced, with no options to turn animations off and performance taking a significant hit every time a flashy animation is played. Battles can take quite a long time to play out, made worse whenever winning is a foregone conclusion. I say that this game is only for the dedicated because team building in Gen 1 is difficult, especially if you're building different teams to take part in each of the 4 main cups, and rental Pokemon tend to be bad on average. You'll either be choosing between a weaker part of an evolutionary line with the better moves, or a stronger Pokemon with a terrible moveset. Finally, many who played Stadium in its heyday will fondly remember its minigames. As fondly as I remember these, I have to admit that they aren't very strong and aren't worth considering over any Mario Party game. For every great game like Sushi Go Round and Rock Harden, there's a dull button masher like Run Rattata Run, Dig Dig Dig, and Thundering Dynamo, or the incredibly awkward Ekans Who Pearl. Returning to Stadium 1 these days might not be everything you expected it to be, but for those who were incredibly passionate about Gen 1, there is something here for you to enjoy all these years later. Pokemon Stadium 2 is more of the same from Stadium 1, but with Gen 2 mechanics instead, and for that alone it would easily be the better of the two games. It suffers many of the same problems from its predecessor. Drawn-out battles, an even worse problem with rental Pokemon, and a lot of easy victories on the way to challenging content, but there's quite a few positives too. The Pika and Petite Cup have been replaced by the Challenge Cup and Little Cup, two formats so popular they're a mainstay on modern online simulators. Challenge Cup gives you a mostly random team of 6 and faces you against other semi-randomly selected teams. And Little Cup restricts you to level 5 Pokemon fresh out of an egg, testing your ability to breed the best possible Pokemon you can. There's also Earl's Pokemon Academy, the first in-game resource for competitive play in the series, and one of the only ones the series has ever had. It doesn't touch on how hidden mechanics work, and in practice some of the things it teaches you are situational, but having a complete resource on every Pokemon in the game and information on how breeding Pokemon works was incredibly valuable, especially in a game released right at the onset of the internet age. The minigames are also of significantly higher quality. All of them have unique conceits beyond simply button mashing, and while not all of them are winners, these would feel right at home in a Mario Party game. Like Stadium 1, there's something to enjoy here if you're nostalgic for these games or the Gen 2 games, but it would be a hard sell for newer fans of the series. Finally, there's Pokemon Battle Revolution. This is Stadium 3 in all but name. Running on base Gen 4 mechanics, the core battle system is just as strong as those titles, with some minor omissions that came later on with Platinum's release. Surprisingly, this was also the first game to introduce trainer customization, including player model customization, something the main series still hasn't introduced. It's a limited set of options, but it's still surprising that the feature made its debut about 7 years early. Like the Stadium games, Battle Revolution has some interesting stipulations, but most of its game modes alter the tournament format instead of how you play the game battle to battle. Tournament Battle and League Battle follow this format, being a tournament like Emerald's Battle Dome and a round-robin tournament respectively. Little Cup returns with the same rules, and Select Battle replaces Challenge Battles, instead allowing you to select from a pool of 12 Pokemon each round. Fortune Battle is an interesting gimmick, but a gimmick nonetheless. All of your Pokemon and all of your opponent's Pokemon are put on a roulette wheel, and players take turns dropping a chip to select one. You can eventually learn to manipulate this, and if you bring in a team of worthless Pokemon, you can effectively stick the AI with the duds. Finally, Survival Battle tasks you with surviving 100 straight rounds with a chance to be healed in between rounds on the same roulette wheel system. It starts off simple and gradually ramps up in difficulty, and this would be a unique challenge if it weren't for the fact that fog can occasionally be a field condition, potentially leading to a loss you wouldn't have deserved. In terms of presentation, Battle Revolution holds up fairly well. While many Pokemon still reuse touched-up Stadium models, graphical effects are of much higher quality, the pacing is faster than in Stadium 1 and 2, and the announcer is Roger Parsons, the same person who narrates the English anime dub.
A fierce blow! The red corner barely holds on!
You can also receive actual rewards for completing challenges in the form of Poke Coupons, which can be spent not only on cosmetics, but on items you can send back to the Gen 4 titles as well. Unfortunately, Battle Revolution feels half-baked in some regards. It's a bit bare bones compared to Stadium in that there are no minigames, no competitive resources, no ways to play through your games on the TV, and the rental system is significantly worse with only a small pool of rentals available to use. You'll get practically nothing out of Battle Revolution without owning a Gen 4 game to go with it, and that, combined with the overall reduced difficulty of endgame challenges, make this a tough sell even for big Gen 4 fans. With all of that said, however, even if the spectacle of seeing Pokemon fight it out in 3D on the big screen has long since faded, I believe that there's a great case to be made for the return of the Stadium series. If Game Freak won't include every Pokemon in every game going forward, how about including every Pokemon in a title that's only meant for battling? A Stadium comeback that exists as a playground for those who enjoyed battle-focused post-game areas like the Battle Frontier and facilitates on-cart competitive play would be amazing. I could forgive a lacking post-game experience if a new Stadium game like this became reality, and I bet this move would be enough to satisfy most of the fans who have been clamoring for a better post-game experience. That's a wrap. Every last Pokemon spin-off up to mid-2021. It's a mixed bag of quality, but spin-offs in this series tend to be interesting if nothing else, and it's rare to find one that's truly inexcusably bad. A common theme among the best of the bunch is that they all leverage the greatest strengths of the main series. Having Pokemon to discover and interact with, and mechanics that are easy to learn but hard to master. If any of these games looked interesting to you, give them a try. who knows? If Pokemon Snap could get a sequel 20 years after the fact, maybe something else in the vast catalog of Pokemon spin-offs will see a revival as well. Well, that's almost every Pokemon spin-off. There are 2 more games I've held in high regard and played many a time over the years that I would consistently rank higher than any other spin-off. I think it's about time to challenge my preconceptions about those games like I did for the main series, and I can only hope they're as good as I remember them being. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, I would appreciate it if you could leave a like and or comment down below. And if you want to see more of these long-form analysis videos, please consider checking out my other content and subscribing for more in the future. Until next time, I'm Forma, and those are my thoughts.